The first time I found flowers outside my door, I assumed someone had made a mistake. It was a Sunday morning in early spring, and I had just come home from the grocery store when I noticed a small bouquet sitting on the step outside my apartment. There was no note, no card, no name, just 7 pale yellow flowers tied together with a thin piece of blue ribbon. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember whether it was someone's birthday. Maybe a neighbor had left them at the wrong apartment. Maybe a delivery driver had made a mistake. I picked them up and checked the hallway. Nothing. My building was small. Only 12 apartments shared the same entrance, and most of the residents knew each other well enough to recognize a delivery. I knocked on the apartment directly across from mine. An elderly woman named Mrs. Collins answered. I showed her the flowers. Are these yours? She looked at them and smiled. No. Do you know who might have left them? She shook her head. Maybe someone has a secret admirer. I laughed. I'm not exactly expecting one. She smiled again. You never know. I took the flowers inside. I put them in a glass on my kitchen table. For the rest of the day, I didn't think much about them. By Monday, the flowers had begun to open. They were beautiful. I remember thinking it was strange that someone would leave flowers without a message. But I didn't investigate. A week later, on Sunday morning, it happened again. Another bouquet. Same yellow flowers. Same blue ribbon. This time there were 5 flowers instead of 7. I stood outside my apartment staring at them. Someone had deliberately left them there. I looked down the hallway. Nothing. I went downstairs. The front entrance was locked. There was no security camera in the hallway, but there was one facing the main door. I asked the building manager if he could check the footage. He looked at me strangely. Why? Someone keeps leaving flowers outside my apartment. He laughed. Maybe someone's trying to impress you. I don't think so. Why not? Because I don't know anyone who would do this. He shrugged. We'll check. That afternoon, he called me. I looked at the camera. And? There was nobody. I thought he was joking. What do you mean nobody? I mean nobody entered the building that morning. I reminded him that the flowers were outside my apartment. He said the camera showed the hallway empty from midnight until 10 in the morning. I asked him whether the camera could have missed someone. He said it was possible, but unlikely. I didn't know what to make of it. That evening, I threw the flowers away. I decided I wasn't going to think about them anymore. The following Sunday, there was another bouquet. This time, there were 9 flowers. Same yellow flowers. Same blue ribbon. But there was something different. A small piece of paper was tied beneath the ribbon. My hands became cold when I saw my name written on it. I opened it. There were only 4 words. I haven't forgotten you. I read the sentence several times. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know who had written it. I immediately called my best friend, Claire. She came over within 20 minutes. She examined the flowers, the ribbon, and the note. Do you recognize the handwriting? No. Could it be someone from work? I don't think so. An ex? No. Someone from college? No. She looked at me. Then maybe you have a secret admirer. I shook my head. Why would a secret admirer say, I haven't forgotten you? Claire didn't answer. She looked uncomfortable. I asked her what she was thinking. She said, maybe it's someone you knew a long time ago. That sentence stayed with me, because there was one person I hadn't thought about in years. My older sister, Emily. Emily had disappeared from my life when I was 17. Not literally. She hadn't died. She had simply left. She moved away after a family argument and refused to speak to anyone. My parents told me not to contact her. For years, I obeyed. Then, when I was 24, I received a letter from her. It contained only one sentence. Don't try to find me. I never heard from her again. I had spent years wondering where she was. Whether she was safe. Whether she ever thought about us. I had eventually accepted that maybe she wanted to be left alone. Claire knew about Emily. She looked at me. Do you think it's her? I laughed. No. Why? Because Emily wouldn't send flowers. How do you know? Because I know my sister. But even as I said it, I wasn't completely convinced. That night, I searched through an old box in my closet. Inside were photographs from my childhood. My parents. My sister. Me. I found one photograph of Emily standing beside a flower garden. She was holding a bouquet of yellow flowers. The same kind I had been receiving. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Then I noticed something written on the back. A date. And underneath it, a sentence in my mother's handwriting. Emily's favorite. I immediately called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. I asked her whether she knew where Emily was. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Why are you asking?" I told her about the flowers. She didn't say anything. Mom? Finally, she asked me a question. Are they yellow? I felt my stomach tighten. Yes. Another silence. Then my mother said something I had never expected. Throw them away. Why? Just do it. Mom, what is going on? I don't want you involved. Involved in what? She refused to answer. I asked her whether the flowers were connected to Emily. She hung up. I called again. She didn't answer. That was the first time I became genuinely afraid. Not because of the flowers. Because my mother knew something. The next morning, I searched online for Emily. I found nothing. Her old social media accounts had been deleted. Her last known address was years out of date. There was no phone number. No email. Nothing. I contacted a private investigator. I told him I wanted to locate my sister. He asked me why. I explained about the flowers. He didn't laugh. Instead, he asked me to send him photographs of the bouquets. I did. A few hours later, he called. He said the flowers were not random. The yellow flowers were a specific variety. He said they were commonly used for remembrance. I asked what that meant. He said, usually, people give them to someone when they're trying to remember a person or a moment. I asked if there was anything unusual about the blue ribbon. He said he couldn't tell. Then he asked me one question. Have you received exactly the same flowers every Sunday? Yes. Same type? Yes. Same ribbon? Yes. Same location? Outside your door. He became quiet. Then he said, someone is making sure you know they're there. I didn't sleep much that night. The next Sunday, I stayed awake. I didn't leave my apartment. I sat in the living room with the lights off and watched the hallway through the peephole. At 6 o'clock in the morning, nothing. 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Nothing. At 9:47, I heard footsteps. Someone was walking slowly down the hallway. I moved toward the door. The footsteps stopped. I looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I waited. Then I heard something touch the floor outside. I opened the door. There was another bouquet. This time, there were 11 yellow flowers. The blue ribbon was tied differently. And beneath it was another note. I opened it. My hands were shaking. The note said, "You promised you'd remember." I stared at the words. I had never made such a promise. At least, not that I remembered. Then I noticed something else. The handwriting. It wasn't the same as the previous note. This handwriting looked familiar. Very familiar. I ran back inside and opened the old box again. I pulled out the photograph of Emily. I compared the handwriting on the back of the photograph with the note. My heart dropped. It looked almost identical. Emily had written the sentence. But that was impossible. She had been gone for more than a decade. I called my mother again. This time she answered. I asked her directly, "Is Emily alive?" My mother started crying. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply whispered, "Please stop asking questions." Then the call ended. I stood in the middle of my apartment holding the note. And for the first time, I realized something. The flowers weren't being sent to remind me of someone. They were being sent because someone wanted me to remember something. Something my family had spent years making me forget. For the rest of that Sunday, I couldn't stop thinking about the sentence on the note. You promised you'd remember. I kept asking myself the same question. What had I promised? I searched through every childhood memory I could think of, but nothing came to mind. The only thing I remembered clearly was my sister Emily leaving home when I was 17. But even that memory had always felt strange. My parents had never explained what the argument was about. They simply told me that Emily had made a choice and that I needed to respect it. At the time, I believed them. I was young, angry, and confused. Emily was almost 10 years older than me, and we'd never been the kind of sisters who told each other everything. But she had always been protective of me. When I was little, she was the person who would sit beside my bed whenever I was afraid of thunderstorms. She taught me how to ride a bicycle. She once walked 3 miles in the rain because I'd forgotten my lunch at school. Those memories were real. So was the memory of her leaving. But there was something missing between those two parts of my life. Something nobody had ever explained. That evening, Claire came over again. I showed her the new note. She read it twice. This is definitely your sister's handwriting. I know. Then maybe she's alive. I don't understand why she would stay away for so long. Claire sat down. Maybe she didn't have a choice. That sentence stayed in my head. I asked her what she meant. She said that if Emily really had been sending the flowers, then maybe she was trying to communicate without being seen. Why wouldn't she just call you? I don't know. Why not send an email? I don't know. Why leave flowers? I looked at the bouquet on the table. Because maybe someone else is watching. Claire didn't laugh. She had started taking the situation seriously. We decided to search through my mother's old belongings. My mother lived about 40 minutes away, and I knew she wouldn't let us search her house. So instead, I went through the boxes she'd given me after my father died. Most contained ordinary things. Old photographs. Christmas decorations. My father's work papers. Then I found a small envelope. My name was written on it. The handwriting was my mother's. Inside was an old photograph. It showed Emily and me sitting on the front steps of our childhood home. I remembered the day. I was about 8. Emily was 18. We were both smiling. But there was something written on the back. Sunday. Nothing else. I stared at the word. Sunday. The flowers had arrived every Sunday. Maybe that wasn't a coincidence. I searched through more photographs. Another had the same word. Sunday. Then another. It was written on the back of at least 6 photographs. I called Claire. She came over immediately. We spread the photographs across the floor. There was something else we noticed. Every photograph had been taken in the same month. September. And every photograph showed Emily and me together. We started looking at the dates. They were all from the same year. The year before Emily disappeared. I asked Claire what she thought it meant. She said, maybe your sister was trying to remind you of something that happened that year. I couldn't remember anything unusual. Then I saw one photograph I'd never noticed before. It showed Emily standing beside a small wooden bridge behind our house. She was holding something in her hand. A blue ribbon. My heart started racing. I zoomed in on the photograph. The ribbon was identical to the ones tied around the flowers. Claire stared at it. That's not random. No. I searched the back. There was another word written there. Promise. I suddenly remembered something. I was 8 years old. Emily had taken me to that bridge one Sunday afternoon. She had tied a blue ribbon around my wrist. I asked her why. She told me it was a secret. Then she made me promise something. I couldn't remember the exact words, but I remembered the feeling. I had been crying. She had hugged me, and she'd said, if you ever see this ribbon again, you have to remember. I had completely forgotten about it. Or maybe I had been too young to understand. I told Claire. She looked at me. What did she want you to remember? I don't know. Then maybe that's what she's trying to tell you now. We searched the old house online. The property had been sold years ago. A young couple lived there now. I considered contacting them. But then I remembered something. The bridge. It wasn't on the property. It was behind the property, near an old walking trail. I decided to go there. Claire came with me. We arrived just before sunset. The bridge was smaller than I remembered. The wood had been replaced in several places. But the river beneath it was exactly the same. I stood in the middle of the bridge. For a moment, I felt like a child again. Then I noticed something. There was a blue ribbon tied around one of the wooden posts. I pulled it loose. There was a small metal key attached to it. Claire looked at me. What does it open? I didn't know. The key had a number stamped into it. 17. We searched the area. Nothing. Then I remembered something else. Our old house had a storage shed. When I was 17, Emily had given me a key to it. I had forgotten. We drove back to the town. The shed was still there. The current owners weren't home, but the shed was visible from the road. We couldn't enter without permission. So I left. That night, I called my mother. I asked her about the bridge. She became silent. Then she said, you shouldn't have gone there. I asked her what the key was for. She said, throw it away. Mom, I'm done listening to you tell me to throw things away. She began crying. I asked her whether Emily had left because of something that happened at the bridge. She finally said, Emily didn't leave you. I froze. What? She was taken. My heart stopped. Who took her? I don't know. You do know. She refused to answer. I asked why she had lied to me for all these years. She said she was trying to protect me. From who? She whispered a name. Your father. I couldn't speak. My father had been dead for years. And suddenly, everything I remembered about my family began to feel uncertain. I asked my mother what my father had done. She said he wasn't the man you thought he was. Then she hung up. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I searched through my father's old belongings. I found his old address book. Most of the pages were empty. But near the back was a name I'd never seen before. Martin Hale. Next to the name was an address. I looked it up. It was an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. I decided to go there. The building looked empty. The windows were broken. The doors were locked. But when I walked around the back, I found a small side entrance. It wasn't locked. Inside, the building smelled like dust and old paper. There were boxes everywhere. I searched until I found a metal cabinet. Inside were files. Most were meaningless. Then I found one with my father's name. I opened it. The first page contained a photograph. It was Emily. But she wasn't alone. She was standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. The woman was holding the same blue ribbon. Under the photograph was a date. 3 days before Emily disappeared. Then I found a letter. It was addressed to my father. The first sentence made my stomach drop. She knows what happened on Sunday. I kept reading. The letter said Emily had discovered something. Something about our family. Something that could expose my father. And she had threatened to tell me. That's why she disappeared. I sat on the dusty floor, staring at the page. My sister hadn't abandoned us. She had been trying to protect me. Then I found one final document. It was a list of dates. Every Sunday. For 1 entire year. Beside each date was the same word. Flowers. My hands went cold. The flowers weren't a new message. They had been part of something that started long before Emily disappeared. And the final date on the list was next Sunday. 3 days away. At the bottom of the page, someone had written, "She will come back for her sister." I looked toward the warehouse door. Someone was standing outside. A woman. She was watching me through the broken glass. I couldn't see her face clearly. Then she turned and walked away. I ran outside. The street was empty. But on the ground where she had been standing was a single yellow flower tied with a blue ribbon. I went back to the warehouse the next morning because I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I'd seen through the broken glass. She had been standing there as if she knew exactly what I was going to find. The yellow flower tied with the blue ribbon was still on the ground, so I picked it up and took it with me. I spent most of the morning going through the documents I'd found in the metal cabinet. The more I read, the more obvious it became that my sister's disappearance had been carefully planned. Someone had been keeping records of her movements, the people she met, and even the Sundays when she received flowers. But there was one name that kept appearing beside hers. My father's. At first, I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe my father had been investigating the same people. Maybe he had been trying to find Emily. Maybe the documents had been collected by someone else and his name simply appeared because he was involved in the investigation. Then I found a photograph that destroyed that explanation. It showed my father standing outside the warehouse. Beside him was the same woman I'd seen the previous night. On the back of the photograph was a date. The day before Emily disappeared. I called Claire and asked her to come over. When she arrived, I showed her the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. That's the woman from the warehouse. I know. Do you know who she is? No. We searched through the documents again. Eventually, we found her name. Margaret Hale. The name meant nothing to me. But underneath it was an address. I recognized the street. It was the neighborhood where my father had worked when I was a child. I asked Claire to stay with me while I went there. The house was still standing. An older man answered the door. I asked about Margaret. He looked nervous. She hasn't lived here for years. Do you know where she went? He shook his head. Then he closed the door. I was about to leave when he opened it again. You should stop looking. I turned around. Why? He looked directly at me. Because your sister already paid the price for asking questions. I felt my chest tighten. Where is Emily? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, ask your mother what happened on the last Sunday before Emily disappeared. Then he closed the door. I went back to my car. I called my mother. She didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. Then I received a text message. It wasn't from my mother. It said, don't go home. There was no name attached. I stared at the screen. A second message arrived. Someone is waiting for you. I looked around the street. Nothing seemed unusual. But when I started driving, I noticed a dark car following me. I changed direction. The car followed. I turned onto another street. It stayed behind me. I drove toward a crowded shopping area and pulled into a parking lot. The car passed without stopping. I waited. A few minutes later, I received another message. Good. You noticed. I called the number. It was blocked. Then the phone rang. I answered. A woman's voice said, you need to listen carefully. I asked who she was. She said, someone who knew your sister. Is Emily alive? There was a pause. Yes. My heart started pounding. Where is she? You aren't ready. I've been waiting 15 years. You've been waiting because your mother wanted you to forget. Forget what? The woman said, the promise. I immediately thought of the blue ribbon. I asked her what promise she meant. She said, the one you made to Emily when you were 8. Then the call ended. I sat in the car for several minutes. I remembered the bridge. Emily tying the blue ribbon around my wrist. Her telling me that one day I would need to remember. But there was something else. A memory I had completely forgotten. That Sunday afternoon, someone else had been there. A man. I remembered seeing him standing near the trees. I had forgotten his face. But now, suddenly, I remembered one detail. He was wearing my father's watch. I drove home. The dark car was gone. I entered my apartment carefully. Nothing appeared disturbed. But the flowers on my kitchen table were different. Someone had replaced the old bouquet with fresh ones. There were 13 yellow flowers. And this time, there was a photograph attached to the ribbon. It showed me and Emily standing on the bridge when I was 8 years old. On the back was a message. You remembered the bridge. Now remember what happened after. I stared at the photograph. Then I noticed something in the background. A small red car. My father's car. And standing beside it was my mother. She was watching Emily and me. I suddenly remembered the rest. My mother had been there that day. And she hadn't come alone. I couldn't stop looking at that old photograph. My mother had always told me she wasn't there that Sunday, but the picture proved she had been standing near the bridge. And if she had lied about that, I had to assume she had lied about much more. I called her again. This time, she answered. I didn't say hello. I simply asked, why were you at the bridge that day? There was a long silence. Then she said, you remembered. Remembered what? The day Emily disappeared. My heart started racing. I told her about the photograph, the flowers, and the messages I'd been receiving. I told her someone had confirmed that Emily was alive. My mother began crying. Please stop looking for her. Why? Because finding Emily isn't the same as saving her. What does that mean? She didn't answer. I asked her whether my father had something to do with Emily's disappearance. Again, silence. Then she finally said, your father didn't take Emily. I felt a strange sense of relief. Then who did? My mother whispered, I did. I couldn't breathe. What? I was the one who took her. I thought I had misunderstood. My mother explained that Emily had discovered something about my father when she was in her 20s. She had found evidence that he had been secretly helping people disappear and start new lives under different names. At first, she thought he was doing something criminal. But eventually, she discovered the real reason. Some of the people he helped were witnesses. People who were afraid of powerful individuals who wanted them silent. My father believed he was protecting them. But Emily didn't trust him. She believed he was becoming involved with the wrong people. She threatened to expose everything. That's when my mother became afraid. She said my father had discovered that Emily was planning to go to the police. He wanted to stop her. My mother knew that if he found her first, Emily might never be safe again. So she made a decision. She took Emily away. Where? My mother said she sent her to a safe place with someone she trusted. Then why did Emily never come back? Because someone found her. Who? My mother said she didn't know. But she believed it was the same person who had been leaving the flowers. I asked her why she had lied to me for all these years. She said she was trying to protect both of us. You were 8 years old. If they knew you remembered what happened at the bridge, you would have become a target too. I asked what I had seen. She told me that on that Sunday, Emily had given her a small envelope. Inside was evidence against someone. Someone in our own family. My father. But before Emily could give it to the police, someone took it. My mother said she had hidden the evidence somewhere only Emily and she knew about. I asked where. She refused to tell me. Then the line went silent. Mom? Nothing. I checked the phone. The call had ended. I immediately called back. No answer. I grabbed my keys and drove to her house. When I arrived, the front door was open. I ran inside. Mom? No response. The house was empty. Her purse was on the kitchen table. Her phone was beside it. Her car was still in the driveway. But she was gone. I called the police. While I waited, I searched the house. In her bedroom, I found an old wooden box hidden beneath the bed. Inside were letters. Most were from my father. But one was from Emily. The letter was dated 15 years ago. It began, Mom, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. I sat on the floor and read it. Emily said she had discovered that my father wasn't the only person involved. There was someone else. Someone who had been helping him. Someone who had access to our family. Someone who had known where Emily was going. Then Emily wrote something that made my hands go cold. I don't trust Margaret. Margaret. The woman from the warehouse. I kept reading. Emily said Margaret had been pretending to help her. She claimed Margaret had promised to take her somewhere safe. But Emily had discovered that Margaret had been reporting everything back to my father. The letter ended with one sentence. If anything happens to me, the flowers will tell my sister where to look. I stared at the sentence. The flowers. The same flowers that had been appearing outside my door every Sunday. I suddenly realized the bouquets weren't simply reminders. They were clues. I looked at the flowers sitting on my kitchen table. There were 13 of them. I counted the petals. Then I noticed something I'd never noticed before. Each flower had a tiny mark on the stem. 1, 2, 3. The marks formed a pattern. I wrote the numbers down. 13, 7, 4, 9, 2. I had no idea what they meant. Then I remembered the old photographs. The dates. The word Sunday. I searched through the box again. There was a small notebook hidden beneath the letters. Inside were dozens of dates. Beside each date was a number. I matched the numbers with the flowers. It created an address. I entered it into my phone. The location was an old train station nearly an hour away. I drove there that evening. The station had been closed for years. There were broken windows and weeds growing through the platform. I walked around until I found an old waiting room. On the wall was a small metal box. It had a keyhole. I took out the key I'd found tied to the blue ribbon. It fit. Inside was an envelope. My name was written on it. I opened it. There was a photograph of Emily. She looked older, maybe in her 30s. She was standing outside a small house, and beside her was a little girl. I stared at the child. I had never seen her before. On the back of the photograph was a message. She is the reason I couldn't come home. I read it again. Then my phone rang. The woman on the other end said only 4 words. Look behind the station. I turned around. There was nobody there. I walked outside. Behind the station was an old road leading toward the woods. At the end of the road was the same small house from the photograph. I stood there for several seconds. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped outside. She looked older than the Emily I remembered. But I knew her immediately. My sister. Emily looked at me. She didn't smile. She simply said, "You finally remembered." Emily stood in the doorway without saying anything else. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I had imagined this moment so many times over the years. Sometimes I imagined hugging her. Sometimes I imagined yelling at her for leaving. Sometimes I imagined asking why she had forgotten about me. But none of those imagined moments prepared me for seeing her alive. She looked older, thinner, and more tired than I remembered. But her eyes were the same. I whispered her name. Emily. She nodded. Then she looked behind me. Did anyone follow you? I don't think so. That's not what I asked. I looked toward the road. Nothing. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Come inside. I followed her. The house was small but comfortable. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator, books stacked near the fireplace, and photographs everywhere. Then I saw one photograph that made me stop. It showed Emily standing beside the little girl from the picture. The girl was smiling. I asked who she was. Emily looked at me. Her name is Lily. Your daughter. She nodded. I couldn't speak for a moment. My sister had a child. A child I had never known existed. How old is she? 10. 10. The realization hit me. Emily had been raising a daughter while our family believed she had disappeared. I asked why she had never contacted me. She looked down. Because I was afraid they would find you. Who? She walked to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea. Then she sat across from me. Before I tell you everything, you need to understand something. The flowers weren't supposed to start yet. What do you mean? I wasn't the one who started sending them. I stared at her. What? Emily explained that the flowers had originally been a secret signal between her and our mother. Whenever one of them needed to communicate without using a phone, they used yellow flowers and a blue ribbon. But after Emily disappeared, the signal was never supposed to be used again. Someone else had started using it. Who? I don't know. Then why did you let me come here? Because I knew eventually you would. She told me that she had been watching me for several months. She had seen me receive the first bouquet. She had hoped I would ignore it. Instead, I started investigating. She said that was exactly what she had been afraid of. I asked her about the note. I haven't forgotten you. She shook her head. That wasn't mine. I felt a chill. What about the other notes? Not mine either. Then someone else is sending them. Yes. She looked toward the window. And they're getting closer. I asked her who she thought it was. She said she had 2 possibilities. My father. Or Margaret. I reminded her that Mom had told me Dad was involved. Emily shook her head. Your father wasn't the person you think he was. Mom said he was helping people disappear. He was. Then why did you say he wasn't responsible for what happened to you? because he didn't know the whole story. She explained that our father had been secretly helping people escape abusive situations and dangerous families. Some had powerful enemies. He created new identities for them and helped them start over. But someone had used his network for another purpose. People began disappearing without his knowledge. My father eventually realized someone was using the same system to make people disappear permanently. He tried to investigate. That's when he became a target. Emily had discovered the truth around the same time. She wanted to expose everyone. But before she could, Margaret approached her. Margaret claimed she could help. Instead, she betrayed her. Where did she take you? Emily looked at me. To the warehouse. My heart dropped. The same warehouse I found? She nodded. I was there for 3 days. What happened? Margaret wanted to know what I had discovered. Emily said she refused to tell her. Then someone else arrived. Our father. He had followed Margaret. He tried to get Emily out. But there was another person with them. A man Emily couldn't identify. During the confusion, Emily escaped. She ran to our mother. That's when our mother made the decision to send her away. But why didn't you ever come back? Emily looked toward the hallway. Because I wasn't alone. I realized she was talking about Lily. Was she born after you left? Emily nodded. Her father was one of the people my father helped escape. I asked if he was still alive. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to a cabinet and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed my father standing beside a man. I recognized him immediately. Martin Hale. The man whose warehouse I'd searched. But there was something written on the back. Martin is not his real name. I looked at Emily. Who is he? She said he had been using different names for years. He was one of the people my father trusted. And one of the people who knew exactly where Emily was hiding. Then why didn't he tell anyone? Because he was protecting Lily. I didn't understand. Emily explained that Lily's father had been murdered when she was very young. Before he died, he left information that could expose the entire network. Martin had hidden that information. He believed it was safer if nobody knew where it was. Where is it? Emily looked at me. You already found it. I thought about the warehouse. The files. The flowers. The key. Then I remembered the metal cabinet. There had been one drawer I couldn't open. I had assumed it was locked because the key was missing. Emily reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small key. This is what you've been looking for. I took it. What is inside? Proof. Proof of what? She hesitated. Proof that our father was framed. I stared at her. Framed by whom? She looked toward the front window. Then she whispered. Mom. I couldn't speak. Mom? Emily nodded. She wasn't protecting us from Dad. Then who is she protecting? Someone else. I asked her to explain. She said our mother had discovered what my father was doing and became convinced he was putting the family in danger. Instead of helping him, she secretly gave information to Margaret. She didn't know Margaret would use it against Emily. But by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. Then why did Mom tell me Dad was responsible? Because she needed you to hate him. Why? Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. Because if you trusted Dad, you might have gone looking for him. I felt dizzy. What do you mean? Emily didn't answer. She walked into another room and returned holding an old newspaper. She placed it on the table. The headline was about a car accident. The date was 9 years ago. My father's supposed death. I read the article. Then I noticed something. The photograph of the accident wasn't my father's car. It was another vehicle. The article said the driver had died instantly. But there was no photograph of the victim. No confirmation of identity. No funeral record. Nothing. I looked at Emily. He didn't die. She shook her head. No. Where is he? I don't know. Then how do you know he's alive? Because he sent me the first bouquet. I stared at her. The first one. Yes. The flowers outside my door? She nodded. Your father started the signal. Then why did you say you didn't send them? Because I didn't. Where is he now? Emily looked toward the door. I think he's coming. Before I could ask what she meant, we heard a car approaching outside. Emily immediately stood up. She looked frightened. I asked who it was. She whispered. That's not my father. The car stopped outside the house. The engine turned off. A door opened. Footsteps approached the front porch. Then someone knocked. 3 slow knocks. The same 3 knocks I had heard outside my apartment every Sunday. Emily grabbed my hand. Whatever happens, don't open the door. The knocking came again. 3 times. Then a man's voice came from outside. Emily, I know you're in there. She looked at me. I whispered, who is it? She shook her head. I don't know. Then the man outside said something that made Emily's face go completely pale. "I brought your mother." The moment the man outside said, "I brought your mother," Emily's entire expression changed. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me away from the door. "Don't make a sound." I could hear my own heartbeat. Another knock. Then my mother's voice came from outside. "Please open the door." I almost moved toward it. Emily stopped me. "That's not the voice I remember." "What do you mean?" "Listen." We stood silently. My mother spoke again. "Please. I need to talk to you." It sounded exactly like her. But Emily was right. Something about the voice felt wrong. Then the man outside said, "You have 5 minutes." Emily whispered, "He's lying." "How do you know?" "Because he always gives people 5 minutes." I stared at her. "Who is he?" She shook her head. "I don't know his real name." The man knocked again. This time harder. Emily walked to the back of the house. "There is another way out." We followed a narrow hallway into the kitchen. Behind a cabinet was a small door. She opened it. A staircase led down into darkness. I looked at her. "Where does this go?" "An old drainage tunnel." "Where does it come out?" "Near the road." We started down. Before we reached the bottom, we heard the front door being forced open. My mother screamed. Or at least, someone who sounded like my mother screamed. Emily pulled the door shut behind us. We ran. The tunnel was narrow and damp. After several minutes, we reached a metal gate. Emily unlocked it. We came out behind a row of abandoned buildings. A car was waiting. A man was sitting inside. I recognized him. Martin Hale. He rolled down the window. "Get in." Emily didn't hesitate. We climbed inside. As soon as the doors closed, Martin drove away. I looked at him. "Who is that man?" Martin didn't answer. "Who was pretending to be my mother?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Nobody was pretending. I stared at him. "What?" "Your mother really was there." Emily looked furious. "Then how did they get her?" Martin said, "She went willingly." I couldn't understand. "Why would she do that?" "Because she wanted to make sure they came after her instead of you." I looked at Emily. She nodded slowly. Mom knew they were getting close. I asked Martin where he was taking us. He said there was a safe place outside town. I asked whether my father knew. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. My father was alive. And Martin knew where he was. We drove for almost an hour. Eventually, we reached an old farmhouse surrounded by fields. Inside, everything looked abandoned. But there were fresh supplies in the kitchen. Someone had been staying there. Martin opened a locked cabinet. Inside were files. He pulled out one folder and handed it to me. "This is why your father disappeared." I opened it. The first page contained my father's name. The second contained my mother's. The third contained Margaret's. Then I found something unexpected. My own name. I looked at Martin. "Why am I in this file?" He said, "Because your father knew they would eventually come for you." I turned the page. There was a photograph of me as a child. Beside it was a handwritten note. "She remembers the bridge." I looked at Emily. She closed her eyes. "What did I remember?" Emily said, "You saw something that day." "What?" "You saw Margaret meeting Dad." I shook my head. "I don't remember." "You were 8. "Then why would it matter now?" "Because you saw what they were carrying." I stared at her. "What?" "A box." I remembered something. A small metal box. My father had been holding it. I suddenly remembered standing near the bridge while Emily argued with him. There had been a woman beside him. Margaret. And she had taken the box. I told Emily. She nodded. "That's what they've been searching for." "What was inside?" "Evidence." "Evidence of what?" Emily said it contained names. People who had been moved through my father's network. People who had disappeared. People who had been betrayed. And one name in particular. The person who had been controlling everything. I asked who it was. Emily said she didn't know. My father had never told her. But the box had been hidden before Emily disappeared. I asked Martin if he knew where it was. He looked at me. "Yes." "Where?" He said, "Your childhood home." I felt a chill. My mother still lives there. "Not anymore." I looked at him. "What?" She left the house before we arrived. I remembered the empty house. The open door. Her phone on the table. She had known someone was coming. Martin said there was a hidden room beneath the old house. A room neither Emily nor I had ever known about. He believed the box was still there. We drove back that night. The house looked exactly as I remembered it. Dark. Silent. Empty. Emily stayed in the car. Martin and I went inside. We entered my old bedroom. He pointed toward the floor. "Here." There was a loose wooden board beneath the bed. I lifted it. Underneath was a narrow metal hatch. Martin handed me a key. I opened it. A staircase descended into darkness. We went down. The room below was small. There were shelves along the walls. Old boxes. Documents. Photographs. And in the center was a metal container. I recognized it immediately. The box from my memory. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Martin looked at me. Open it. Inside were dozens of documents. But there was one photograph sitting on top. It showed my father, my mother, Margaret, and another person. I didn't recognize the man. But Martin did. His face changed. Who is he? Martin whispered. That's the person we've been looking for. Who? He took the photograph from my hand. My father. I stared at him. Your father. Martin nodded. He explained that his father had been the person who created the entire system my father later tried to dismantle. He had recruited people, created false identities, controlled the money, and used the network to manipulate families. But there was something even worse. He had been working with my mother. I looked at the photograph again. My mother wasn't standing beside him by accident. They had been partners. I felt sick. Why would Mom do this? Martin said, because she believed your father was going to expose them. Then we heard footsteps upstairs. Someone was walking through the house. Martin immediately shut the box. Someone followed us. We turned off the light. The footsteps stopped above us. Then we heard a woman's voice. Come out. My blood went cold. It was my mother's voice. But this time I knew it was really her. Martin whispered, she's alone. We climbed the stairs. My mother was standing in the hallway. She looked exhausted. Her face was wet with tears. She looked at me. I didn't want you to find the box. Why? She stared at the metal container in my hands. Because once you open it, there is no going back. I asked her the question I'd been waiting years to ask. Did Dad really die? She shook her head. No. Where is he? She looked at Martin. Then at Emily. Finally, she looked at me. He's been looking for you. Where? She whispered. He's at the place where the flowers began. I remembered the bridge. But she shook her head. Not the bridge. She pointed toward the box. The garden. My childhood garden. The place where Emily and I had played every Sunday. My mother said there was something buried there. Something my father had hidden before he disappeared. Before we could ask anything else, the lights in the house suddenly went out. A car stopped outside. Then we heard a familiar voice from the front yard. My father. Open the door. My mother closed her eyes. Emily whispered. He's here. The sound of my father's voice coming from the garden left all three of us frozen. For 9 years, I had believed he was dead. Now he was standing somewhere outside the house, calling for us. My mother walked toward the window, but Emily stopped her. Don't. My mother looked at her. You don't understand. I understand enough. Martin moved toward the back door. My father called again. I know you're inside. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I walked toward the door. My mother grabbed my arm. Don't open it. Why? Because you don't know which version of your father you're about to meet. I pulled away. You've lied to me for years. Everyone has. I need to hear the truth from him. I opened the door. My father was standing in the garden. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was gray. His face was thinner. But there was no doubt. It was him. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said, I'm sorry. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to ask where he'd been. Why he'd let us believe he was dead. Why he'd never come home. Instead, I asked the question that mattered most. Did you send the flowers? He shook his head. No. I looked at Emily. She was standing behind me. My father stepped closer. The flowers were sent by your mother. My mother immediately said, that's not true. My father looked at her. Then tell them what you did. She began crying. He explained that the flower signal had originally belonged to my mother and Emily. But after Emily disappeared, my mother continued using it to communicate with people connected to the network. Years later, when my father discovered that someone was using the signal to lure me into the investigation, he started following the clues. He didn't know who was sending them. He only knew that whoever it was wanted me to find the box. I looked at the metal container in my hands. What's inside? My father said, enough to destroy everyone involved. Martin stepped forward. Then why didn't you use it? My father looked at him. Because I didn't have the complete evidence. He pointed at the box. I only had one part. I opened the container again. Underneath the documents was a small notebook. My father immediately recognized it. That's the missing piece. I opened it. The pages contained names, dates, payments, and addresses. But the final pages were different. They contained short messages written by people who had been helped by my father. One message said, "They made me disappear because I knew too much." Another said, "They changed my name and told my family I was gone." Then I found a message written in my sister's handwriting. It was dated the week before she disappeared. I know who is behind this. I looked at Emily. She nodded. I wrote that. What did you discover? She looked at my mother. I discovered that Mom wasn't working for them because she wanted money. My mother closed her eyes. Emily continued. She was protecting someone. I looked at my mother. Who? She finally answered. Your father. Nobody spoke. My mother explained that she had originally joined the network because she believed it was helping vulnerable people escape dangerous situations. But over time, she discovered that some people were using the system for their own benefit. She tried to leave. They threatened my father. So she stayed. When Emily discovered the truth, my mother tried to protect her too. But Margaret found out. Margaret was the one who arranged Emily's disappearance. My mother had blamed herself ever since. Then came the part none of us expected. My father said Margaret wasn't the person in charge. She had been following orders from someone higher. Someone who had never been identified. I looked at the notebook. Is the name in here? My father nodded. At the very end. I turned the pages. The final sheet contained a single name. I read it. Then I looked at my mother. She had gone completely pale. It was her name. My mother's. I couldn't speak. My father said quietly, she was the person they were protecting. My mother began to cry. But before I could ask what that meant, Emily interrupted. That's not the whole truth. Everyone turned toward her. She took the notebook from my hands. The name is real, but it doesn't mean what you think. She opened the final page. There was another sentence written beneath my mother's name. Primary witness. I stared at it. My mother wasn't the person controlling the network. She was one of the people being protected. The entire time, she had been hiding because she was the last surviving witness who could identify the people behind everything. She had lied to us because she believed that if anyone discovered she was still alive and talking, they would come after the entire family. My father had disappeared to protect her. Emily had disappeared to protect me. And the flowers had been the only way they could slowly lead me back to the truth. I asked my father one final question. Who sent the first flowers? He looked at Emily. Emily shook her head. Then my mother said something that made all of us go silent. I did. I stared at her. She explained that she had started sending the flowers after realizing someone had begun searching for the old evidence. She wanted me to find the truth before they did. But she couldn't contact me directly because her phone and home were being monitored. The first bouquet had been her. The second had been her. The notes had been written by her. But she hadn't expected me to uncover everything so quickly. What about the flowers after that? She looked at Emily. Those weren't mine. Emily nodded. Someone else copied the signal. My father immediately understood. Margaret. Emily shook her head. No. She looked toward the garden. She's been dead for 3 years. I felt a chill. Then who? Nobody answered. We went outside. The garden was silent. My father walked toward the old flower bed where my mother had told me something was buried. He knelt and started digging. After several minutes, he found a small wooden box. Inside was a bundle of letters. The first was from Emily. The second was from my father. The third was from someone whose name I didn't recognize. I opened it. It said, I know you finally found the box. If you're reading this, then the flowers did their job. There was no signature. Only one final sentence. Your sister was never the person I was trying to reach. I looked at Emily. Then I read the final line. I was trying to reach you. I couldn't understand. Then I noticed the date on the letter. It had been written only 2 months earlier. Someone had known exactly what would happen. Someone had known I would find the flowers. Someone had planned the entire trail. My father took the letter from my hand. He looked at the handwriting. Then his face changed. What? He didn't answer. I asked again. Who wrote it? He finally looked at me. Your grandmother. I stared at him. My grandmother had died when I was 12. She had been gone for more than 20 years. My father turned the letter over. There was a second message written on the back. Some secrets survive the people who created them. I looked at my family. For the first time, I understood that the flowers had never been about a missing person. They had been about a promise. A promise Emily had made me remember. A promise my mother had tried to protect. And a truth my father had spent years trying to uncover. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. Who had been leaving the flowers recently? My mother swore it wasn't her. Emily swore it wasn't her. My father hadn't done it. And Margaret was dead. We never found out. A week later, the investigation officially began. The documents from the box were handed over to authorities. Several people connected to the old network were questioned. Some were arrested. Others disappeared before they could be found. My father finally returned home. My mother stopped hiding. Emily and Lily became part of our family again. It wasn't easy. There were years of anger and pain that couldn't disappear overnight. But at least we could finally speak honestly. Every Sunday, we started having dinner together. And for a while, the flowers stopped. Until one Sunday morning, almost a year later, I opened my front door. There was a small bouquet sitting on the step. 7 yellow flowers, tied with a blue ribbon. No note. No name. I stood there staring at them. Then I noticed something underneath the ribbon. A tiny photograph. It showed me and Emily standing on the old bridge when we were children. On the back was one sentence. I knew you would remember. I looked down the street. There was nobody there. I never discovered who left that final bouquet. Maybe it was someone who had survived the old network. Maybe it was someone who had been watching us. Or maybe it was simply the last part of a promise that had taken more than 20 years to keep. I still keep the blue ribbon. Not because I'm afraid of what it means, but because every Sunday, when I see it, I remember the sister who never abandoned me. She just disappeared so I could survive. And sometimes, that's what love looks like. Not staying. Not explaining. Just leaving a small sign behind and hoping that one day, the person you love will finally understand. By the time the investigation officially ended, my family had changed in ways I never thought possible. My father was no longer a ghost from my childhood. He was sitting at our dinner table again, trying to make up for 9 years of silence. My mother had finally stopped hiding the truth. Emily was no longer a name from an old photograph. She was back in my life, and Lily had become the little niece I wished I had known from the beginning. But even after everything was explained, I couldn't forget the flowers. For months, I kept asking myself who had left that final bouquet. My mother insisted it wasn't her. Emily said she hadn't sent it. My father didn't even know about it until I showed him the photograph. He studied the picture for a long time. Then he asked me something strange. Did you notice the date? I looked at the back. There was a date written beneath the message. It was the same date as the Sunday when Emily had first tied the blue ribbon around my wrist. The day everything had started. My father told me that he had spent years trying to understand why that particular Sunday mattered so much. He finally realized something. Emily hadn't been the only person who made a promise that day. My grandmother had been there too. She had watched everything from a distance. She knew what my father was involved in. She knew what my mother was hiding. And she knew Emily was planning to leave. Before she died, my grandmother had left several letters with a lawyer. One of those letters was eventually given to me. It explained why she had never told me the truth when I was young. She said children remember emotions before they remember details. She knew that one day, something would bring those memories back. She believed the flowers would be that signal. But there was one thing she couldn't have known. The flowers had continued long after her death. That meant someone else had taken over the promise. We never found out who. Years passed. Life became normal again. Emily and I became close in a way we'd never been when we were younger. She told me stories about Lily's childhood. I told her about everything she had missed while she was gone. Sometimes we laughed about how strange our family was. Sometimes we cried. But we never again pretended that the past didn't exist. My father started helping people again, but this time everything was legal and transparent. My mother began volunteering at a local support organization. She said she wanted to spend the rest of her life helping people who were afraid they had nowhere to go. And I kept the blue ribbon in a small wooden box beside my bed. Then, almost 3 years after I first found those flowers, something happened that I still can't completely explain. It was another Sunday morning. I opened my front door. There was a bouquet waiting for me. 7 yellow flowers. Blue ribbon. Exactly like the first one. I stood there for several seconds. Then I noticed a small envelope attached to the ribbon. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my entire family standing together outside my childhood home. My father, my mother, Emily, Lily, and me. The photograph had been taken only a few weeks earlier. Nobody in the family knew who had taken it. On the back was a message. You kept your promise. There was no signature. I immediately called Emily. She came over. We looked at the photograph together. She started crying. I asked her if she had any idea who could have sent it. She shook her head. No. My father examined the photograph. Then he noticed something in the background. A figure standing near the trees. A woman. We couldn't see her face. but she was wearing a blue ribbon around her wrist. My father zoomed in on the photograph. His hands began to shake. He whispered a name. I asked him who it was. He didn't answer. Emily looked at him. Who? My father finally said. Margaret. We all went silent. Margaret had supposedly died 3 years earlier. But the woman in the photograph looked exactly like her. We contacted the authorities. They investigated. The photograph couldn't be traced. The flowers couldn't be traced. And there was no evidence that Margaret was alive. Maybe the woman was someone who looked like her. Maybe my father's memory was wrong. Maybe there was another explanation. I never found out. But I stopped being afraid. Because by then, I had learned something important. Secrets only have power when everyone is afraid to talk about them. Once the truth is finally spoken, even the darkest family history becomes just a part of the past. The flowers never appeared again. Not once. But every Sunday, I still look outside my door. Sometimes I expect to see that familiar yellow bouquet waiting for me. And when I don't, I feel strangely disappointed. Because those flowers changed my life. They brought my sister back. They forced my family to tell the truth. And they reminded me of something I had forgotten when I was 8 years old. A promise doesn't always disappear just because you forget making it. Sometimes it waits patiently. Years. Even decades. Until you're finally ready to remember. I still don't know who left the first flower. I don't know who left the last one. And maybe I never will. But I know one thing. If someone had told me 3 years earlier that 7 yellow flowers outside my apartment would lead me back to my sister, expose a secret my family had buried for decades, and bring my father home, I would have laughed. Now, whenever I see yellow flowers, I don't think about fear anymore. I think about Emily. I think about Lily. I think about my family sitting around one table again. And I think about that little girl I used to be, standing on a bridge while her sister tied a blue ribbon around her wrist and whispered that one day she would remember. She was right. I did remember. It just took me 20 years to understand what I had promised. Would you have kept searching for the truth after receiving the first mysterious flowers, or would you have walked away and left the past alone?